All right. Here's Trinity Perini.
So nice to be here.
It's so nice to have you here. Yeah, I'm so glad that Erica said, hey, you should come on.
And she emailed me out of the blue and she's like, hey, volunteering you, you're going to be on a podcast. And I was like, okay. Hi, Brittany. Hi, Brittany.
I love this. I love this so much. Well, so we briefly met the day of the open house.
Yes.
And because you do art therapy too, right?
No.
Okay, that is not you.
Oh.
But I remember walking into your office and seeing a really cool piece of artwork.
Okay.
And
yes.
I think that's why I was like, wait, did she make it?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I love arts and crafts in my free time.
Okay, great. And now the Kindle and all the romance novels.
I have a disgusting obsession with romantasy.
You know what? It's a train that I want to hop on, but I think I am a little afraid of getting obsessed with it.
It's honestly so deeply upsetting. And I tell my partner this all the time. Like, I'll just look up at him and I'll be like, fuck, I'm not a dragon. And it's so grim when you like come back to reality. I was really against the romantasy train for a while. And honestly, I think I had just like a superiority complex where I was like, I'm too academic for this, because I was like the kid that would grow up reading like textbook for fun.
Yeah.
And my therapist eventually, she was like, can you read something that is light and enjoyable? And I was like, how dare you challenge me in that way? And I did. I got a bunch of recommendations from some friends, Erica being one of them. And I'm on board. And the ship has sailed. I read a disturbing amount of romantasy.
Wow.
Yes.
I like the sailing journey for you. I really do.
I'm long gone.
Yeah. Yeah. It's a little like how when Game of Thrones came out and everyone's talking about Game of Thrones, it does have this like cult classic, like you gotta be reading Court of Thrones and
Yep.
Thank you.
Yeah,
yes.
Avatar.
Yep. That one.
Yep.
You gotta be reading something glass.
That was kind of my first series that I read.
Which one is it?
Akatar
Okay.
by Sarah J. Maas.
Okay.
Yeah.
Got it.
That was my foot in the door.
Okay. And then you just get hooked from there.
Yes. And then the Kindle is helpful because then, I mean, I'm working on shame of reading those books as well.
Okay.
Because there's places.
Yes. So it's funny reading. Okay. So I read a few spicy novels over the summer.
Yeah.
Also was trying to get away from the nonfiction world that we typically live in into something a little more like fun.
Right.
So I was reading this one book and I know like I saw other women around the pool also reading the same book. And I'm like, and I look around, I'm like, this is what we're all reading here.
Oh yeah. Hell yeah.
This is what we're all getting into right now.
Yeah, no, it's good. Until someone like comes over my shoulder and reads it out loud and like, you're disgusting. Stop.
People will do that?
My partner will.
I mean, that's kind of fun. I guess. Anyway.
I just like can't imagine it in real life, and then you're fine.
Yeah.
It's like the thought of someone like purring at me, not it. That is not my jam. Not here to yuck anyone else's yum, but I can't do a purr at me.
Just can imagine someone walking behind you and purring. That would just be, yeah.
But in the book, it works.
Yeah. It's funny we can get away with in Fantasyland.
I know. They're bold.
Very.
So great from like an explorative standpoint, though.
Yes.
Like I'm really glad to see so many teens like in the romantasy world, because it's such a healthy way to explore sex and sexuality and kink. And I think it's so, yeah.
No, I like that but really how else are they going to learn outside of porn, which don't recommend. Definitely like don't recommend that for teenagers to learn about sex. Yeah. But I think that this is a very accessible way that kind of disarms, especially teenagers or people who are just starting to explore sexuality.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's so nice.
I'm a proponent of it.
Yes. Have you read the book The Erotic Mind by Jack Moran?
No.
Okay, so it's probably been around since like I think it was written in the 80s, but it's a good book. And I actually enjoy reading it. However, he interviews or has over 300 people that he's studied and then created the whole study of eroticism.
Yeah.
So it's going to people's sexual fantasies. So originally I was listening to it on Audible and I had it on in my car and I was riding up to a gas station and I realized hold on, at stoplights. Like, people are listening to the fantasy descriptions that are happening in the book. So I was like, maybe I should switch to the hard book read, which I did. And I am very much enjoying it. But if you really want to just like shock some family members and be like, this is what I'm reading for myself,
Put it on CarPlay?
put it on CarPlay. Yeah. And just see how everyone reacts. Yeah, because that's the other thing is if you listen to it as listening on Spotify, so it's like if you listen to it on Spotify, then it's automatically just
Oh, it's gonna reboot.
it's just gonna reboot and play. And so then I had somebody get in my car and I was like, oh, we gotta like
because something's getting unsheathed.
yes.
And
We need
to put this on pause.
Yes. I'm like abort mission now. Please.
Right.
Yes. Can't hit the stop button fast enough.
No.
So we're here to talk about pain today.
Yes.
Yes, we are. Chronic pain specialist.
Yes, that is me. It's weird even hearing like the word specialist. I'm 1 year post-grad, about a year and a half.
Okay.
But I have so deeply fallen in love with the chronic pain community in the therapy space. It has a lot of meaning to me personally, professionally. I love this population.
What got you into working with this population?
Well, I would say back when I was an undergrad, I knew I wanted to do some form of clinical work. And I was in between a clinical PhD program, like all the applications for that, and social work. And obviously, one is a lot longer, but one's paid for. And social work, is not paid for, but it was only 2 years. So there was something compelling about that. But actually, I am an incredibly indecisive person by nature. And so I went to a trusted professor when I was at Clemson. And I asked him, I was like, what do you think I should do? Just give me an answer. And instead of giving me some sort of like philosophical bullshit of you need to find this answer within yourself, he's like, do social work. And I said, okay. And I submitted my applications that next month. And I went into social work. And while I was finishing up my undergraduate at Clemson, I experienced several months worth of really intense chronic UTIs. And that was a really challenging experience for me because one, I was very far away from home. I just came to the age of being able to call the doctors by myself and schedule appointments. And now I'm going in relatively incessantly for this really pesky and honestly at times debilitating issue. And I would go into these appointments in just a shit ton of pain. And I was trying all these like Google made, manufactured solutions that were just not effective by any means. And I would go in and I would tell them just how much pain I was in. And they would run urine cultures every time, and the urine cultures would come back negative. And I have a childhood history of IBS. And so the thought of being on antibiotics when they weren't necessary or appropriate was really scary. And so being 20 years old trying to advocate in the medical system was also its particular kind of nightmare. And so whenever I would go home with these antibiotics that didn't make any sense and a urine culture that didn't justify my sensations or my symptoms, I was just feeling kind of lost. And not to mention having to advocate for care in the medical system as a young female was also really rough because with the sensitivity of it being urinary tract infections, I caught a lot of shame from the system where my hygiene was being questioned, my sexual practices were being questioned. And that was really tough because one, I didn't even know what the hell was going on with me, but now I'm like having to justify my sexual practices or my hygiene or water intake. I love to ask about how much water you drink. And that was really frustrating. And so I would go through this cycle, basically month after month, where I would just go back to the urgent care and go through the same dance of saying, here are my symptoms. You're going to do a urine culture. It's going to come back negative. I'm going to go home sad and depressed and not know how to treat this because I'm not going to even pick up the antibiotics that you're going to send to the CVS because they're going to mess my stomach up. And we're just in this cycle of I'm desperate for help and I keep going to the same place that's not supporting me or helping me. And it was this kind of maddening cycle. And then when maybe like a year or two later, yeah, when I was in my master's program, I went and I finally saw a urogynecologist that was in network with my insurance, and it was a man, and he was not very helpful, although he was helpful in the sense that he told me I was diagnosed with interstitial cystitis, which was scary because it sounded like a Harry Potter spell, and I was like, "What the fuck is that?"
Say it one more time.
Interstitial cystitis.
Interstitial cystitis. Okay.
That's correct.
That is a Harry Potter spell.
And so he looked me in the eyes and he was like, "You have interstitial cystitis. That's what we are assuming." Assuming was also the word that was there, which was really reassuring. And he told me that this was chronic and that this was something that I was going to have to live with, likely for the rest of my life. And he gave me two solutions that day, or quote unquote solutions, because he said that they have really poor effective rates and really rough side effects. The first thing that he recommended to me was a medication that I would be on daily for the rest of my life, potentially. And it had such severe side effects like blindness. And I was like, "Sarah, I am 22 years old. I don't want to be on a medication for the rest of my life that could cause blindness. And you're telling me it has, I don't know, I'm going to bullshit this, but it was like a 30% effective rate or something like that, where it wasn't even going to be promising enough to take that risk." And so that was maddening. And then the next strategy or treatment that he recommended for me was it's called a bladder installation, where they basically go up through a catheter and they fill your bladder up like a balloon. Yeah, I know. It sounds actually like medieval torture.
It does.
But that is something that some people have found relief in, but that was a ridiculously costly procedure. Even with insurance, it was a couple $1,000s, and still the effective rate was relatively low. And I was like, these are incredibly grim options that you're throwing my way. I actually saw him twice more for follow-ups, basically still just trying to get by with the very few solutions and relief sources that I could find. And when I actually ran into one of my MSW colleagues, somehow I think he had overheard me talking about my IC. And he was really, really helpful in the sense that he just kind of one day handed me a business card for a pelvic floor physical therapist that he knew of. And he was like an angel in the night. And I called her immediately. And she's been such a huge support in my IC journey, in the sense that when I first had a session with her, I just left in tears because it was like being seen by a medical provider for the first time in my life. She validated my experience. She made the urine cultures make sense. She was able to feel around in my pelvic floor because it's an internal process. She was able to feel around and justify and say that it makes sense why you're in the pain that you're in. And she was able to bring me basically instantaneous relief doing her work as well, which was just like a godsend. Like I looked at her and I was like, "I just fell in love with you." I was like, "You are the perfect person to have found me at this point in time." When I started working with her, I actually learned that pelvic floor physical therapy is the only grade A treatment for IC, and it wasn't recommended to me at all in the 3 visits that I had with my provider. And I actually did have to call up and beg to get the referral to see her first and foremost. And so that was problematic on so many levels. And so being a young person, a young woman in particular, navigating the medical system and having to advocate for my reality to be justified, having to advocate for treatment modalities to be accessible to me, that was extraordinarily challenging. And, I'm recognizing that there are so many populations too that are in the margins that go through this in much more difficult ways. But it was a really tough experience that I absolutely hate to be part of this terrible chronic condition club. And at the same time, being able to find community both personally and professionally in this club has just been like my favorite part of being a clinician. And so when Erica had sat me down and basically was like, "Who are you going to work with?" It was when I was in the height of going through a lot of these experiences. And I just found a whole lot of community in wanting to work with particularly younger people who have chronic health conditions because, like I was saying, it's this club that no one wants to be in, and you just kind of get thrust into it like someone just signed you up for a newsletter and you have no idea how to unsubscribe. And so when I started working with people in the clinical space and being able to really understand their stories and being able to talk about the systematic abandonment in the medical system as well, I think that that's one of the great gifts of being in social work too, is being able to identify kind of those more larger systemic influences of people's experiences. And there's nothing like sitting across from a white man at an office telling you to drink more water and ask you if you're on your period. And it's so much bigger than that. And so, yeah, that was a really long roundabout way to tell you.
No,
This.
I appreciate you sharing all your story and all that you went through because I mean, it sounds like one, this was a stressful time of life. You were in grad school when all this was going on.
Undergrad and then grad school.
Yes. Undergrad and grad school.
Yes.
So you're just starting out in life and going, I might have to face this day in, day out.
Yeah.
I'm trying to figure out my career trajectory, what life is going to look like, and then this is getting thrown on top of you.
Yes.
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 And then to navigate all the doctors in the medical system as a whole, gosh, rant of a podcast that could take 5 hours, but yes.
I know. And like I said, I was like just getting to the age where I was like calling and making appointments myself. I'm sure the receptionist just could not stand seeing me back because I wouldn't even pick up the prescriptions that they would order for me because it was not personalized by any means. So it was, and it continues to be a challenge in the medical system, but I actually still see my PT, and she has been a godsend in the way that she has connected me with a network of affirming and inclusive providers in this area. And so, yeah, I would have a shrine of her if I could.
Can I ask who she is?
Caitlin Bachman.
I was about to say, you want to shout her out?
Yeah. She's that OBGYN. She's an angel, literal angel.
Amazing.
And she actually gave me a book when I was very early into treatment with her that taught me so much about interstitial cystitis. And it taught me about the brain-body connection as well. And one of the grimmest realities that I learned in that book, but also one of the most empowering, was that after the first chapter, it says that by now you have learned more about interstitial cystitis than people graduating from the medical system know. And that is both something that is going to feel incredibly isolating, but also incredibly empowering when you're able to go into medical spaces and advocate for the care that you need and deserve, even if they're not offering those options.
Wow. Yes. So when did you read this book?
I read it about 2 years ago now.
Okay. So you were in grad school at the time?
Yes.
Okay. So when you read this book, did this like change what you thought your clinical focus might be or what your career focus might be when you were going to be graduating grad school?
Oh, absolutely. Because a large portion of this book, it talks about the brain-body connection and the impact that the nervous system has on people who have chronic pain and all sorts of different chronic pain conditions. And I think that this was reading it through that book and learning it through my PT was probably the only way that I really could have understood that narrative, because I think being, as I was mentioning earlier, being a young woman in the medical system, there's so much that just gets chalked up to anxiety, right? Like doctors will say anxiety is the cause, and then it's a full sentence, and then treatment stops there. And so when mental health gets weaponized and becomes a barrier for continued treatment or accessibility to other treatment modalities, that is just so inherently dangerous. And so when I was able to kind of re-identify and relearn this narrative of, yes, anxiety in your nervous system can be playing a role in your chronic health conditions, and if you have chronic pain conditions, then as opposed to that being disempowering, it actually was super empowering, because I was able to reclaim that narrative and then also figure out a way to merge it into my clinical practice as well. At that point, Erica had introduced me to pain reprocessing therapy. And that is basically all about the brain-body connection and reprocessing pain in the body. And so I had taken that training as my first round of CEUs. And that is absolutely what set me up for my trajectory of working with the chronic pain community.
Okay.
And introducing it in my own life as well.
So you took the training and then that introduced you to the modality?
So I actually first read the book that works with the training, and so it's called The Way Out by Alan Gordon, who's also an LCSW. And honestly, the first time that I read the book, I was super skeptical of it because I was still not fully on board with the kind of idea of neuroplastic pain, which is brain-generated pain, because of just how weaponized that narrative is in the medical
It's
community.
all in your head?
Right,
Yeah.
exactly, it's all in your head, and so I was really resistant to that because you work for so long trying to get a physical diagnosis of your pain, something that is going to be a tangible receipt of your pain is real, because in our current medical system, anxiety or any type of, like, mental health almost seems to disqualify when you have a chronic condition or any type of symptoms that are otherwise unexplained. And so when I first read the book, or when I was first in a couple chapters, I remember being really annoyed and mad at it because this man was bold. Alan Gordon is bold because he starts out swinging, saying that he is going to be able to cure people of chronic pain. And typically in the mental health space, we only talk about being able to manage pain. We don't talk about
Curing.
curing it
Yeah, we
or
don't
getting
use that
people back.
word.
And so I was like, he is unbelievably bold. And it was impossible for me to not read it through the lens of my own experiences as well. And
Sure.
so I'm both critical of it from a professional, but also a personal level. And I do feel that the more that I read it, he did invite skepticism. And I took him up on that invitation, and I just feverishly wrote notes and annotated throughout the entire book. I think I read it in like 4 hours. And I was really able to, with the psychoeducation that was provided in that book, I was really able to start to see how the brain body connection has legitimacy. And I was able to apply myself to a lot of the stories and the anecdotes he provided and a lot of the research that he provided. And so once I saw that, I figured that if I could try it personally and see how it does, then let's see how I can introduce it to other people. And doing some of the skills in pain reprocessing therapy is hard to do independently. Luckily, they do have an app, it's called Curable, where you're able to utilize some of the kind of like mindfulness scripts and psychoeducation tools, and you're able to integrate it into your own practice a little bit easier. But I was able to do some PRT work myself, and I did see a significant reduction in my pain experience, but more so, and this is kind of at the crux of it, my relationship to my body and my relationship to the pain that I experience and the sensation that I experience completely shifted. Overall, being able to invite more curiosity into my body and into my nervous system has just been something that has been like unbelievably helpful.
What in particular did you notice shift in you?
So I would say that when you have neuroplastic pain or sensations or chronic pain for that matter, whether it's structural or if it's brain generated, your body and your nervous system feels perpetually hypervigilant and on high alert. And so a metaphor I kind of like to use to explain this is like, imagine if you're hiking in the woods and everything feels like fun and beautiful, and all of a sudden you run into a spider web. And now every time a tag touches you or a leaf brushes up against you, if your hair like touches your arm, you're immediately interpreting that sensation as another spider. And so that's exactly what's happening for your body if you are predisposed to neuroplastic pain or if you've had chronic pain for a long time. And so your nervous system is constantly afraid and scared. And so any sensation that you notice is going to be interpreted through this lens of danger and threat. And so being able to introduce pain reprocessing work into my life has absolutely shifted the way that I look at my nervous system, because now I am purposefully leaning into things that are going to tend to and soothe my nervous system. And so if anybody knows me in person, they know that I'm the coziest person in the world. I am always finding ways to invite peace and softness into my body, especially when you're someone who's experienced pain and discomfort for as long as you have. Being able to manufacture and stubbornly find comfort in your body has been something that's really soothed my nervous system. And one of the cool things I love about pain reprocessing therapy is that because it's just generally a nervous system rewiring modality, you're able to work on reducing the pain fear loop with emotions as well. And so for a lot of people who have neuroplastic sensations, they're not only afraid of physical sensations that they notice in their body, more often than not, they also have a bit tumultuous of a relationship with emotions. And so oftentimes people will be really afraid or fearful of maybe certain unpleasant emotions in their body, whether it's anxiety or fear or anger or sadness or frustration, etc. Grief is a really big one. A lot of the modalities that we use in pain reprocessing can help the nervous system start to feel safer when it's in proximity to not only sensations in the body, but also emotions in the body. Pain reprocessing therapy has really helped shifted my focus on my nervous system and my somatic experiences and also my emotional landscape.
They're all tied in. Yeah, because I think of mindfulness practices. I think of when people say holistic therapies, body-based therapies, somatic-based therapies, but this sounds like it's different in the sense of how the conceptualization of the framework is. Is
So
that's like the framework that PRT uses?
absolutely. Yeah, very well said. So
Okay.
all pain is processed in the brain. And so regardless of whether or not it's neuroplastic or structural, all pain feels real to the brain and all pain is real to the brain. And so what happens often for people who have chronic pain or they have an acute stressor that sends their nervous system up in arms is that their threshold for noticing stimuli in the body lowers. And so the brain, as opposed to being able to filter out a lot of sensations that it experiences on a regular basis, it's now going to be more hypervigilant and critical of sensations that it's interpreting. And so now your brain is not only receiving more sensations and becoming more aware of sensations, it's also in a state of what we call in PRT high alertness. And so when your brain is on high alert, it's basically this kind of frazzled little mess who has just watched a horror movie and is interpreting any sensation that it notices as something that's threatening and dangerous. Noticing more sensations and then being predisposed to perceive those sensations as threatening or dangerous creates this feedback loop for your brain where it gets stuck in this pathway of noticing more sensations. And then when those sensations are paired with a state of being afraid of those sensations or dreading those sensations, then they get re-registered as pain. And then it creates this kind of feedback loop where you're going to notice more sensations and then those sensations are going to be interpreted more often as pain. And it gets stuck in this loop.
Okay. So it's the fear pain
Yes.
dynamic.
Yes.
And when you're doing PRT, are you working on the fear around the pain first? Or is there like an order of operations to this?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So that's a really great question, too, is just kind of talking about the layout of pain reprocessing therapy. And so if I say you were someone coming to me for pain reprocessing therapy, the first thing I'd want to start working on with you is generally getting to know the emotional experience of your pain, right? Because similar to what I was explaining earlier, kind of talking about my story, it's more than just the physical sensation of it. It's got a whole emotional narrative wrapped up into it. Being able to hear people's stories and validate that their pain experiences is real is first and foremost, because especially for populations who are marginalized or systematically abandoned, you really want to be mindful about validating their experiences. And so that is where I try to approach PRT first and foremost, is being able to really like sit down with someone's humanity and validate their experiences prior to even introducing the topic of pain reprocessing therapy. And then following that, it's a lot of psychoeducation because pain reprocessing therapy at its core requires a level of buy-in to be able to release some of the control over needing this pain to be legitimized in a structural kind of way. And so it also requires the buy-in because of needing to rewrite that narrative of pain is all in your head, because it's one that gets weaponized and used against so many people whenever they're in the medical system. And so the psychoeducation is key, because when people feel as though these experiences are backed by evidence and research, then it helps to lower and disarm the defensiveness that comes up when we talk about the idea of some of these sensations being potentially brain generated. And what I often tell a lot of my clients is you only have to believe it 1% if we're going to start it. I don't need you to buy into it 50%, 75%, 100%. In fact, I invite the skepticism because I think that that's going to create authentic buy-in and also give people time to figure out what their pace is going to be in this process, because I recognize that I didn't have buy-in really until I was completely done with the training and utilizing it in my own life. And so I really advise my clients and the people that I work with to authentically come to a relationship with pain reprocessing therapy. And then we'll go through the assessment portion of neuroplastic pain, which I think is really interesting because there are ways that people can come to experiencing neuroplastic sensations and developing it. And so we look for kind of like 8 key criteria. And I won't rattle them all off because honestly, I blank on a lot of them unless I'm looking at them right. But some of the big ones that we look at are identifying how the experience of pain came about. And so for some people, it'll be that they had an injury that should have otherwise been healed by now, but is still perpetuating and is still causing them problems. So you'll see that in a lot of like people with back pain, where it's like, oh, I threw my back out 6 years ago and I've had back pain since. Well, from a structural perspective, your back should quote unquote be healed at this point. We're still developing these pain signals from this location that feel very, very real and are real to the brain, but may not have a structural cause at this point. It may be more cemented in the neural pathways of the brain as opposed to something that's structural. Other people will have a gradual onset of pain, and that's something that happened for me with my chronic UTIs. Is I was getting a UTI maybe once every couple weeks, and then it would subside, and then the time between UTIs, or quote unquote UTIs is what I'll call them, because the urine cultures never came back accurately or never came back showing any sign of infection. So the time between those quote unquote UTI symptoms just got shorter and shorter. And so to the point where pretty much every day I was experiencing UTI symptoms. And so mine was a more gradual onset. And then other people will develop neuroplastic pain or sensations based on an acute emotional stressor. There have been some instances where if someone has a recent death in the family or a really intense breakup or lost their job, and then suddenly they develop back pain or wrist pain or foot pain or knee pain, it might not have anything to do with an activity, but that's usually what people will pair it with. They'll be like, well, that night I was weight training or I was at yoga. And it's like, well, yes, you were at yoga, but really it could have been the fact that you lost your job that day. The emotional kind of tether to that experience is what's at the core of that neuroplastic experience.
So can I okay, so when you're saying like, let's say, take that example you just said. Okay, so someone's like, hey, this pain started when I was at yoga.
Yeah.
And then turns out they lost their job that day.
Yes.
Okay. So when they're like, what are they coming in for? Are they like, I strained something that won't go, like I strained my hip flexor and it won't go away.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is that kind of what they might be presenting when you're working with them as a client?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. Yeah. So by the time that they would come to pain reprocessing therapy or come to therapy for pain, it's usually something that they've experienced for several months on end,
Okay.
if not years. And so usually I catch them later in time, which is always interesting because at that point, they're likely not thinking of any of the emotional context behind that experience, because likely they're attributing it to something physical or some sort of physical activity. And so kind of getting back into retelling that story can often reveal really important emotional context. Yeah. And then another way that some people come to neuroplastic pain and developing that is if they've had adverse childhood experiences or intense trauma, or it doesn't even have to be intense in terms of happening all of a sudden or acute instances. It can be compounded, it can be gradual. But we know that trauma increases the likelihood of nervous system dysregulation. And when your nervous system is dysregulated, you're more hypervigilant, both of people, of interactions, of emotions, and of sensations in the body. So you could become more hypervigilant, both of the external and the internal world. And so we'll often find that people who have adverse childhood experiences or trauma histories are more likely to develop neuroplastic pain at some point in their life. And then what I think is also interesting is there are common kind of personality traits of people who have neuroplastic pain. And it was no surprise that I fit the bill. So there are 4 main personality traits that they say, and it's people who deal with or have been labeled to be conscientious, people-pleasing, perfectionist, and have anxiety.
Did you feel called out? Yeah.
Immediately. And I would say that a lot of my clients fit that bill as well. And so being able to see neuroplastic sensations and neuroplasticity in the body as having such a kind of comprehensive origin story is something that further validated the legitimacy of it for me.
And you had also mentioned being an athlete.
Yes.
And so I feel like that those traits also go right with the athletes,
Oh
especially
gosh.
female athletes.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Females who love to move are, I think, absolutely fit that bill too.
Yes. Yes. And so it's been so interesting to see just the commonalities between my clients who come into my office. And I'm like, oh, you guys would be friends.
Do you want to start a group so that way you can?
Exactly. I'm like, you're all just as much of a people pleaser, as conscientious as the next. And it's perfect. It's endearing. I say it respectfully as a member of that society.
Amazing. Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So you're looking for these key traits.
Yes.
Okay. And then you're telling them you don't have to buy into it, but then how do you start? Like if you were, and you could use me as an example, like what does PRT look like in practice?
Yes. So thank you for bringing me back on track. So once we do the neuroplastic pain assessment and get to identify like what are people's criteria that they hit.
Yeah.
And another thing that we want to look into is what we call an evidence sheet, which is basically we're looking for loopholes in when you don't experience consistencies in your pain. And so, for example, for me, I get a lot of pain at night. And that is largely because I have very minimal distractions. I am sitting on the couch and I am trying to read. I'm trying to be cozy, but I am able to pay attention to my body. And if I've been in a heightened state of emotions throughout the day, especially, doing the work that we do
as a therapist, weird that would happen.
Mad and emotions all day.
Yes.
And so when I come home and my brain's a bit more hypervigilant or a bit more kind of on edge or less curious and more hypervigilant, it's looking into these sensations in my body, and it's going to be more likely to call these sensations pain sensations. And so I notice that my pain often flares at night. I also know that my pain flares in longer car rides or if I'm seated for a while. So when we're creating people's evidence lists for their pain, we want to find gaps in the consistency of the pain that they experience.
So that means like sitting versus standing, like if we feel it one versus the other more.
Yes. And so one of the examples that Alan Gordon talks about in the Way Out book is the fact that he experienced back pain only in certain chairs that he would use. And so that is something that's a neutral stimulus, right? It's a chair. It shouldn't necessarily have a huge effect on the structural pain, but he had a specific chair that he would have to roll around to his college classes in order to not experience pain. And if you think about having a broken ankle, for example, it doesn't matter what kind of shoes you wear, you're still going to feel the broken ankle.
Mhm.
And so for other people, that could be incongruencies in time of day, it could be in seasons, it could be in certain positions or certain activities. So, for example, some people will report having back pain while vacuuming, but not while they're gardening. And so it's like when we're experiencing joy or we're having pleasure when we're gardening, but we're frustrated or we're irritated or we're frantic when we're vacuuming. And so we have these activities that we pair with our pain, and then they become conditioned responses, is what we would call them in the clinical kind of sense.
Okay. So is the definition for chronic pain, do you know if there is a length of time before it becomes chronic or
3 months is
3
what they
months?
typically say because the research shows that after 3 months, that's when your nervous system lowers its threshold for noticing stimuli. And so you then actually it's a really interesting, actually a really cruel feedback loop. So people who experience chronic pain for 3 months or longer have what's called a lower threshold for noticing pain, but a higher threshold for tolerating it. And so you will notice more pain, but you will be more likely to tolerate the pain.
Yes. And so thinking about again the fitness athlete
Yeah.
kind of realm, like I like to run. I hang out with some people who also
Yeah.
like to run, and runners have a really high threshold because they are if they have a race coming up and they get knee pain, they're like, I gotta ignore it.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
they're just like, I'm still doing this. So I still got a 17-mile run. So you're telling me that I can't do that? Like, I don't think that's gonna work for me.
Yeah.
So yeah, definitely can see how that
Yeah.
that goes hand in hand.
Absolutely. And you also think about it from like an emotional front as well. And you get these people who are used to tolerating physical pain and will in turn learn to tolerate emotional pain as well. And so that's where you get a lot of people who are going to be in these loops of repressing, and it can be really harmful both from an emotional nervous system standpoint, but also a physical nervous system standpoint as well.
And I I'm imagining that can get labeled as resiliency.
Mm.
You're so resilient.
Oh, what a complicated relationship to that.
Right? Right?
Yeah. Because I think that there is, especially when we live in a culture, right, where we have to mention that oftentimes people who experience chronic health conditions get blamed in some way, shape, or form, experiencing their condition or developing their condition. It's like, what did I not do enough of? Or what did I too much of? How did I bring this onto myself? And so I see for a lot of people, I mean, myself included, there's a lot of shame wrapped up in having chronic conditions. And so you not only deal with that, but you also deal with the pressure to not let anybody else see it, or to not be quote unquote weak, or to not let it affect your work or your family or your relationships. And so we end up developing this quote unquote skill of resilience. But I think in a lot of ways it's repression. And I think in
Mhm.
a lot of ways it's minimization and invalidation. And it's just this like residual trickle down effect of our pick yourself up by the bootstrap culture that we live in, where it's like, this is your pain to deal with, whether it's validated by the medical system or not. And it's your responsibility to not make it anybody else's responsibility.
Mhm. Yeah, that it really does fall on which as you experience, it definitely falls on the client or the patient or whoever is struggling with it, that it falls on them to be really responsible for doing the research and seeing what's out there and then getting the accurate help.
Yeah. Oh
Yeah.
my gosh, there's something so deeply isolating and almost like this sense of abandonment when you go into an appointment with a provider and you're 5 minutes in and you know more about your condition than they do. And that is such an experience that I see with so many of my clients is they're like, I'm going to this provider for a referral to get to a different provider, they are someone who is going to take away this hurdle for me to get access to care somewhere else. And for some people, I know myself included, there's a lot of grief when you have ran through a lot of the providers that are in your area and you don't know where to turn to next.
Yeah.
And there's almost like this like clawing at the walls desperation feeling. And so that's one of the many reasons why I love pain reprocessing therapy, because it is something that does feel so accessible in the way that there are so many tools and opportunities to use it independently and to introduce it into daily living. And honestly, at the core, because it is just working to rewire the nervous system.
So because I actually want to circle back to a place with the incongruencies.
Yes.
What are you looking for when you're talking about those? Like, so you're looking for the incongruencies of like, like you said, a broken ankle is a broken ankle. You're going to feel that no matter which way you're sitting, standing, however.
Yeah.
But let's say it's, I don't really feel this when I'm sitting, but when I'm standing in a certain position, I feel this. Or I don't feel this when I'm walking, but I feel it when I'm hinging. I feel it when I'm moving my shoulder in a certain way, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
What are you assessing for in those incongruencies?
We're assessing exactly that, the incongruencies, to be able to see the blips in the consistency of pain experience. And so where that actually shows up a whole lot, where people can be really conscious of how those inconsistencies work, is in somatic tracking, which is arguably the main strategy that we use in pain reprocessing therapy. To give a background definition on somatic tracking, it is a mindfulness technique that utilizes exposure, safety reappraisal, and positive affect. And so I can kind of get into how all those three things work. But basically, if I were to run you through a somatic tracking exercise, what I would first and foremost encourage you to do is connect with your breath. So maybe closing your eyes and starting to look at your breath from a place of non-judgment. And so we're not trying to do anything or change anything about your breath. We're just going to notice it and get really curious about the characteristics of your breath. And so maybe the temperature and the texture of your breath, how it changes from each inhale and exhale. And for a lot of people, that's really confusing, because it's like, how does this thing have so many characteristics, right? It's like my breath. I'm not noticing it on a day-to-day. And so I usually start people in somatic tracking with just being able to describe and lean into the sensation of their breath, because usually for people, that's something that's neutral. And so being able to regulate the breath is also helpful for starting the activity, because that's our entryway to working with a regulated nervous system, is if we're able to soften the breathing. And then I will encourage people to do body scan, where we're able to soften and relax some of the tension that's in the body. And I'll try to pair that with their breath as well. So we're basically getting in and we are telling the nervous system that we are safe to start entering this activity of exposure. And for some people, we might need to do just those first two steps of somatic tracking for a couple weeks to just start to build a relationship of trust in the body, which is something that is really challenging for a lot of people who have had chronic pain for a while to have. Like, it's hard to feel like you can trust your body. It's hard to feel like you can trust the experiences in it. Oftentimes, people who are in chronic pain find that their body is an awful place to be, and find that it brings you to the present moment in terrible ways. It kind of like drags you in. And so being able to be with your breath and relax the muscular tension is where I will start with people. And then what I would encourage people to do is we kind of step back into psychoeducation land to talk about the importance of how we're going to pay attention to the sensations in the body. And so first and foremost, I remind clients that the opposite of a dysregulated nervous system is not being in a state of calm. It's being in a state of curiosity, because curiosity allows you to approach, right? And to be able to expose in safe ways, and to tell yourself that you are capable of being in proximity to whatever the fear stimulus or trigger is. And so we talk a lot about how we can get into that state of curiosity. And so we use some guided imagery where I will, try to encourage people to find a perspective or think about an experience where they're able to cue into that curiosity. And so one of my favorites is the feeling of like when you're a little kid crouching down and finding a bug or a flower in the woods, and you're just like so curious, so intent. You're being able to describe the characteristics of the bug, the color, the texture, the size, the shape, how it's moving. And not everybody is going to like bugs, but that is my way of kind of getting into that perspective of doing somatic tracking, because that's the perspective that we're going to want to use with doing exposure to the sensations that you're experiencing in your body. And so once clients are able to identify how to use that mindset, then we are able to get into the body and do the breath work, do the muscle relaxation, and then begin to approach the sensation. And so typically what I'll say or what I'll ask clients is just tell me whatever's coming to your attention right now. And so for me, if they were going to do somatic tracking on me, it would often be somewhere in my pelvis. And I would encourage clients to, as curiously as I can, just describe the sensations that they're noticing. Describe the texture. Describe a color that comes to mind if you're closing your eyes and you're trying to get a visual for it. Is it sharp? Is it dull? Is it heavy? Is it light? Is it big? Is it small? Does it have a temperature to it? And when you are getting clients to feel safe enough to describe the characteristics of it, you're leaning into that curiosity. And a really big thing that I like to encourage clients as well is to remember that we're outcome independent in the process of somatic tracking. And so oftentimes people will try to use somatic tracking almost in this like desperation of, I'm going to do this thing that's going to get rid of this pain immediately. And what that's actually doing is it's sending messages to our brain and to our nervous system that we're trying to get rid of the sensation. So it means that the sensation is dangerous. And so we want to approach whatever we're noticing from a place of authentic curiosity and really identifying if we have an ulterior motive. And so I always tell clients when we're doing this, I give them the safety reappraisal of, you are completely safe to be in proximity to these sensations. And truthfully, it does not matter if they intensify, if they subside, if they move around. Because honestly, if they do any of those three things, it's just evidence that their sensation that they're noticing is neuroplastic. Because if it was completely structural, we wouldn't be noticing changes in the sensation just by paying attention to it.
Interesting.
Yes.
Okay, so when you're looking for the incongruencies, is that almost like saying like, okay, so there's something here where it is plastic. It's not structural because you're not feeling this all the time, like consistently. And then when you are noticing the somatic tracking, and if it does change or it reorients or it gets stronger or smaller, then it's like, okay, this is more of the brain telling your body that you're in pain.
Yes. And one of my favorite things to do is remind clients that the sensation of pain or any type of discomfort is just an opportunity for us. And so sometimes I'll get really excited when the sensation intensifies for a client because I'm like, oh, hell yeah. Like just by paying attention to it, it's changing, which means that this is to some degree neuroplastic. And so it's so interesting to be able to see that once I give clients or people that positive kind of regard of the sensation is changing, which means that it to some degree is neuroplastic, they'll almost instantaneously say like, oh, it shifted or it changed or it started to subside or got really intense when you said that. And so being able to see how people's relationship to the pain will change the experience of the pain is what we're looking for when we're finding evidence of neuroplasticity.
Okay. So the finding evidence of neuroplasticity is looking at if you pay attention to it, what happens.
Yes, exactly. And the key is if you're paying attention to the sensation from an authentic place of curiosity, lightness, and ease, that is what is going to tell the nervous system that we are safe to be in proximity to the sensation. So whatever happens to it, it happens. And what I'll often also remind people incessantly when we're doing somatic tracking is to continue to check in with their breathing and the muscular tension. because what we want to do is we want to remind the brain and the nervous system that we're safe in 3 different ways. And so we want to stay connected with our breath, because when we're able to exhale fully and exhale long, it helps activate the parasympathetic nervous system, which is going to calm the nervous system. And we're going to also want to relax the muscular tension that we feel in our body, because being able to relax muscles also sends safe signals to the nervous system. And then finally, we actually want to go through the cognitive process of telling our brains we're safe. So I'll often vocalize that for clients, and then they'll vocalize it in their head in whatever way makes sense to them, whatever mantra they want to use. But I'll typically say, and they know this on repeat, I'm safe to be with this sensation. This sensation is not inherently dangerous. We don't care if it intensifies, if it subsides, if it goes away, if it changes in any way. It is completely safe to be in proximity to this sensation. The only goal in this entire practice and process is not to change the sensation, it's to change our relationship to the sensation and see what happens when we do that. Utilizing breath work, muscle relaxation, and safety reappraisal through the cognitive process using mantras that's kind of the trifecta of what we do to bring healthy and safe exposure to neuroplasticity. And a disclaimer that I also feel is important to say here is it's important to do somatic tracking when we are in a safe range of pain. And so if you are, I have a difficult relationship with pain scales, but if you are subjectively below a 5 or a 6 on whatever your pain scale is, that's a really optimal time to do somatic tracking, because your nervous system feels safe enough and can get into a curious position to do somatic tracking. But if we are above that range, we are likely at risk for re-traumatization. And so we wouldn't want to use somatic tracking at that point. Instead, we'd want to do what we call our avoidance behaviors. And so leaning into, for some people, that might be medication, or that might be getting into certain physical positions, that might be avoiding our triggers, that might be distraction. Whatever we can to not be in proximity to that sensation, we're going to want to do if the pain is too high. That way we're not perpetuating the cycle of fear and pain.
So is the distraction recommended to not perpetuate it, or is the distraction more like we want to notice the distraction so that we can just see that that's what our strategy is to manage it?
I'd say both.
Okay.
I'd say both for sure. And so to give an example for me, I know that when my physical therapist and I have done PRT work in conjunction with her physical treatment plan for me, we will.
Wait, hold on.
Yes.
So wait, this miracle worker.
Yeah, I know exactly.
So she does pain reprocessing therapy with you, or you were doing this with another mental health clinician and she's the pelvic floor therapist?
So funny enough, she does not do PRT, but I have found that a lot of physical therapists that I have met with in the community, they know a lot more about neuroplasticity than any other medical provider that I've worked with.
Yes.
They know a whole lot about the brain-body connection. And so when I started explaining to Caitlin that I thought some of my pain was neuroplastic, she agreed wholeheartedly. And so kind of talking about how we marry the relationship between PRT and physical therapy, at least for me, is she is able to help bring down my pelvic floor. So she actually releases the muscular tension in my pelvic floor, which sends those safe signals to my brain, right? Because it's releasing the nervous system tension. And then we have distraction protocols that we use. So that would be like, for me, I have a medication that I take that basically numbs the bladder and the urethra and soothes the burning sensation that I experience. And she'll encourage me to use that medication if I am anywhere on the cusp of like a 4 or 5 with my pain, because we don't want to cement this fear that I have, right? Because sometimes, especially that mindset we were talking about with resilience before, I wouldn't use a medication until I was like at an 8 or a 9 with pain, because I'm like, I need to get through this, I need to get over it.
Oh, so that's not recommended?
No. And so she was someone who was really encouraging of me to utilize my medication, utilize my distraction tendencies and skills to help accommodate when that pain is too high to do somatic tracking. And so that's been really helpful to also destigmatize distraction when it comes to anything mental health wise. Being able to lean into distraction when distress is high is a really, really valuable tool. And I think that that works both on the emotional front and also on the physical front as well.
So it can be a welcome tool to help regulate. Okay, that frames it. All right. So when you first heard this of like, hey, you don't have to be an 8 or a 9 and take the medication, what was your first thought?
First thought, I was like, wow, where was this permission before?
Yeah.
Being told that you could take medication when your pain is at a 3 or a 4 felt absurd, but absurd in the most liberating way. And so I absolutely lean on her advice, and I do a whole lot of avoiding of my pain if it's anywhere in proximity to a 5 or a 6 or anywhere higher for that matter, because I think that there's also taking it on a soapbox, but I also think that women in our society feel as though we have to subject ourselves to pain. It's just something that's expected of us, whether it's physical, emotional. I think that there's this narrative that we're supposed to suffer in silence. And so I think being able to have that permission to lean into pain relief sources, even if the pain isn't debilitating, is something that's so deeply healing, both from a physical sense, but also from an emotional sense as well.
I think that for a lot of women, it is definitely, there's a suffering sense. I mean, I think of Quaalude that was in the 60s that it was, oh, you're depressed or you're feeling something here. We'll just like numb you out, basically. Right. So that was the strategy then. And even now, I read an article recently that was like IUD pain is now to be taken seriously. And it's like for the first time ever. And we've been prescribing this for how long? Like, great, great, great. And I think what you experience, right? It's like going to all these doctors and then kind of getting this sort of loose, hey, yeah, this is what we can do for you. And then we got another patient in 10 minutes. Exactly. And so that is the turn and burn medical system. And also with medical systems, you're not getting the physical therapist who's going like, let me know you. Like, I think that the sign of a good physical or PT physical therapist is, are they asking you how stressed you are? Are they asking you about like what your day to day looks like? Right. And if they are, then you're in good hands. That's a good sign of someone who's looking at you going like, what is your emotional experience? What is your day to day experience? And then what is it like in your body?
And doing it in a way that holds those experiences with velvet gloves as well, because it can be so scary for women to talk about the emotional front with a provider and not fear that that's going to get weaponized and used as a justification for why they have the pain that they have. Right. It's like, oh, well, you're just stressed or you're really anxious, clearly. And yeah, that's it. End of sentence.
No, it's more of I'm using this to inform my practice.
Right.
Not to dismiss or to say like, yep, cool, we'll massage that and keep it going.
Because it's impossible to extract the experience of mental health distress from chronic conditions. It doesn't matter if it's chicken or the egg, which came first. They're inevitably going to be looped together. And so one shouldn't be the end of the sentence for the other. It needs to be a larger conversation on how they are married and what their relationship is and how we can legitimately address the mental health component of it without it minimizing or invalidating someone's experience.
Yeah. I mean, when we talk about emotions, we always ask, I mean, the cliche therapist thing that has a lot of memes around it, especially right now, is like, what does that feel like in your body? But there is a reason why we're asking this. And it's, well, how is that emotion showing up for you? And, when people cry, they'll tell you right away that they have a tightness in their throat, and they feel it in their chest, and then there's a tear coming down their cheek. Like, that is what crying is. And that's a clear sign of an emotion. So it's the idea that this isn't intertwined almost feels like, but it's so we can point to signs that are clearly obvious to say that it is. And now it's just deeply understanding it because it's so complex. Yeah.
It's such a good point.
It's so complex. But okay, so when you you were doing your own PRT work and working in conjunction with physical therapy.
Yes.
And you found this to be relieving for you?
Absolutely. So I would say how I still go about practice in my own treatment, because I still go to physical therapy. As much as I believe in pain reprocessing therapy, I think pain reprocessing therapy is something to be used in conjunction with a team is affirming and is able to provide treatment modalities from their specifications. And so I absolutely rely on Caitlin to help me on the physical end of things, because the tools that she equips me with to be able to bring down my muscular tone is something that I know is going to help with my nervous system regulation. Because I had never a clue how to soften or bring down my pelvic floor. And so being able to ID those sensations and those muscle groups has been invaluable. She's also really legitimized, and as a therapist, of course, we know that breath work is helpful, right? But she was able to legitimize it from a more physical perspective. And so being able to pair breath work with some of the physical things that she supported me with, both of those things have been very valuable tools for pain reprocessing therapy, because I'm able to approach it from a structural and a neuroplastic lens, because the two are absolutely looped together. And so something that I often explain to clients is, when your brain is misinterpreting sensations from the body, it's likely to tense the muscles and or send inflammation to that location site. And so oftentimes people will be like, well, I have these physical manifestations of tension in my body or these structures of pain in my body. How are you explaining that that's neuroplastic? And well, those things are looped together, right? And so if you are in a state of high alert and your nervous system is causing your muscles to tense, then that's going to send signals of danger to the brain. And if your brain is interpreting sensations from the body as dangerous, it's going to tense the muscles in the body. It's going to send inflammation. And so it's a feedback loop that just is perpetual.
Yeah. Any, like, for anyone who might be struggling with any version of this, where would you recommend that they start?
I would recommend starting in information gathering land. And so there are so many really helpful online resources and bibliography resources. I would direct people to the pain reprocessing therapy website. On there, they have a free newsletter where they send out different articles each week, typically Thursday, that just has super valuable information for people to learn about different connections with PRT, different conditions that PRT has been used for. And there's also a directory on that website too for providers in the area that are certified in pain reprocessing therapy, because most of the people who are certified in PRT are mental health providers, but you can also be a practicing physician that is able to get certified. General providers are certified in PRT, which there aren't a whole lot of people yet certified in PRT because it's relatively new, but if there are any providers in the area, they'd be on that directory. There's also the Way Out book that I had referenced earlier that is super key. That's honestly where I have a lot of my clients start as well, because I think that's a great independent research opportunity to be able to read that at your pace and come up with questions and talk through them and process them in the therapeutic space. I think that that is a really great tool. They also have what's called the Curable app, and that has a whole bunch of psychoeducation wrapped up in it. They have some somatic tracking scripts and mindfulness like audio recordings that you're able to listen to and try to do some somatic tracking alongside a guided coach. And then there's also a podcast called the Pain Reprocessing Therapy Podcast. It's very accurately named. And that's a really great resource also for people to get more information. I'd say the big thing is just having information on it, largely because this narrative of it's all in your head is so weaponized in our culture. And if we're able to reclaim that narrative and be liberated by it and find strategies where we can use that narrative to our advantage, then that is so valuable. But it takes a lot of getting to that place where you're receptive to it at a pace that makes sense to you. And so I think psychoeducation is absolutely key there, and people independently exploring that.
Yeah. I love that. Anything that we haven't touched on that you want to touch on before we wrap up?
I have kind of like a little fact tidbit that we can add at some point in this. So, for a lot of people who are going through the revolving door of the medical system, at some point, they're likely to work with a provider who does some sort of scan or test or surgery that identifies that there is something structural in the body that is wrong or is at the source of a potential challenge, right? And Western culture is really big on doing invasive procedures first. And so oftentimes you'll get people who go through these massive like back surgeries, for example, and they'll be told like, hey, you have scoliosis or you have herniated disc or you have degeneration. And this is what's the source of your pain. But then you go through the full recovery duration, 6 to 8 months, whatever it is, and you're still experiencing pain. And that shouldn't, quote unquote, be the case if they were able to resolve the issue from a structural perspective. And so, something that I like to talk about a lot with clients is that 64% of the population has some degree of degeneration or a herniated disc, and not all of that population experiences pain. And so you can have these physical abnormalities in your body and it not be painful. And so that is a really big piece of evidence that I like to use with clients where it's like, yeah, you may have that physical structure in your body that is, you know, inherently problematic, but your brain isn't registering it as pain. Your brain is fine living amongst that. Whereas some people might have the herniated disc or the disc degeneration and experience pain. And so some people might have a hypertonic pelvic floor like me and experience pain. Others might have a hypertonic pelvic floor and not experience pain. And so structural abnormalities are not a guarantee for experiencing pain. And so when you get that reassurance from a provider where it's like, no, you do have the scan that shows something abnormal, oftentimes people say, well, that's finally it. And you can still have a neuroplastic experience with that.
Amazing. I love that. Oh, this makes me want to deep dive into PRT then. It sounds, I mean, the way you're talking about it, I'm like, wow, this sounds, I was listening to the PRT podcast and they had mentioned something like 60 or 70% of people who went through PRT experienced no pain afterwards. So, I mean, it was something that was high. It was something that was almost like, what is this miracle procedure that we all need to be utilizing? So, because I mean, even as someone who doesn't specialize in chronic pain for people, but I have people coming in going, yeah, I have pain. And
Yes.
and we're talking about surgeries and we're talking about the medical system and we're talking about all these things. So I think that this would definitely be like a helpful tool in the toolbox.
Oh my
Yeah.
gosh, absolutely. Yeah, I think what you're referencing is the Boulder back pain study. And that was completed, I don't know how many years ago, but that was the main study that they were able to collect enough funding in order to basically like launch PRT as an evidence-based modality. And in that, they found that the populations who received PRT, I think it was 98% of them experienced a reduction in their pain experience, and 66% were almost completely pain free, if not fully pain free. It's wild because, as I was mentioning earlier, mental health modalities for pain are all around coping with it and managing pain. And this is the first therapeutic modality that works to actually address the sensations in the body and work to retrain the brain to learn that these sensations aren't inherently threatening, they're not inherently dangerous. And so your brain no longer has to identify them as pain. And so I think it's absolutely cutting edge, up and coming. I'm so glad to be where I'm at with this modality, having learned it so early in my career and being able to kind of follow along in my continuing education as it's evolving in the field and its new stage. And so, yeah, I love to be part of this work because it also feels just so tangible for this population who's so desperate for answers and strategies and treatments. And this feels like something so real that I can offer people and something real that I've been able to provide in my own life as well.
Yeah. Oh, this is great. Yes.
Yay.
Yay. Anywhere where people can find you.
Oh, you can find me. I am so unbelievably avoidant to my phone, so I'm off of social media.
I love this.
Like throw my phone in a couch cushion for 6 months and I'll find it later. And so social media is not the place you can find me. You can find me on Wholementality social media. Erica comes in and snags videos of me unexpectedly with my consent. And so you can find me there. You can also find me in the Wholementality website, my Psychology Today. You can find me on the Pain Reprocessing directory as well.
Amazing.
And then out in the community at a cafe or crouched down by a flower or bug somewhere.
Perfect. Perfect. We'll look for you in all those places.
Yes.
Thank you so much for coming on, Trinity.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Of course. You're welcome to ramble anytime. All right. Until next time, everyone, stay connected.